Hey, what is going on everyone? In the last video, what we did was set up our tic-tac-toe board so we can actually place in X's and O's. Now, in this video, what I'd like to do is actually finish up our tic-tac-toe app, so let's get started. Alright, so now at the end of the last video, what I believe I did was challenge you guys to get this play again button to work. As of now, you can see it doesn't do anything. So let's go ahead and actually add some functionality to our play again button so we can continue to place in markers when our tic-tac-toe board is filled. So I'm going to close our emulator. And to do this, what we're going to have to do is create a reset game method. So if we come over to our gamelogic.java file, just below our update game board method, what we can do is type in public void reset game. And then it's going to take in nothing, and all we have to do is repopulate our 2D array with a bunch of 0 values. So if you remember, we did that in our constructor, so I could just copy and paste our nested for loops here that updates our game board with 0 values, and we can just do that anytime our reset game method is called. Now we're going to have to create one more reset game method in our tic-tac-toe board.java file because in our game display activity, it doesn't have access to the GameLogic class. So let's come all the way down here at the bottom of our tic-tac-toe board.java file, and we can define a new reset game method for this class. So we can go public void reset game, but within here, we're going to call game.resetGame, that method that we just created. And then we can come over to our game display.java file, and we can actually call that method from our tic-tac-toe board view. So to do this, what we're going to need to do is actually grab our tic-tac-toe board and store it in a variable within our game display activity. So to do this, let's come up just outside of our onCreate. We can type in private tic-tac-toe board. I'm just going to call it tic-tac-toe board. And then we can come into our onCreate method. And all we have to do is type in tic-tac-toe board, set that equal to a find view by ID. And then we're going to go r.id, whatever the ID was. And I honestly don't remember what it was. So let's come back over, find our tic-tac-toe board tag. And the ID should be in the first line here. So I'm just going to copy and paste it over into this spot right here. So this code right here should find the view, our tic-tac-toe board, and store it within our tic-tac-toe board variable. Now, when we click on the play again button, this method is called. So within here, all we have to do is type in tic-tac-toe board.resetGame, and then don't forget we have to update the display of the tic-tac-toe board. So we can do that by typing in tic-tac-toe board.invalidate. So now this is all the code you need to reset the markers on our 2D array. So let's come up to the far right, click the play button to run our emulator. And then once it loads up, I'm going to click play. I'm not going to fill out any of these fields here. Let's fill up our tic-tac-toe board real quick. And then if we click the play again button, our tic-tac-toe board is cleared. And then we can come back in here and continue to place in X's and O's, and we can keep clearing our board too. So that's pretty cool. But right now, if a person gets 3 in a row, so if we make X win, nothing happens. So we need to start writing some logic to actually end the game and draw on that winning line to show the users who won. So let's close our emulator and we can actually start writing this code. Okay, so now the first thing we're going to have to do is create our setup game method. So if we come back over to our tic-tac-toe board.java file, this is where we actually defined our tic-tac-toe board view. We could come just above our reset game and we could type in public void setup game. And then this is going to take in 4 arguments. It's going to take in a button, which is going to be our play again button. So we could type in play again. And it's going to take in our home button. So button home. And then it's going to take in the text view. So that text view that's going to display whose turn it is. And then I'm going to call it player display. And then finally, we're going to take in a string array, which is going to store the players' names. So we can type in names for this variable here. And then we can close this off, and then we're gonna have to go into our game logic and create some setters to actually store the values that were passed within our setup game method. So if we come back over to our gamelogic.java file, before we create the setters, we need to actually create the variable that's gonna store those values. So let's come just above where we define our game board, and we can type in private button. We can call it play again button. We'll create another private button, and this is gonna be our home button. And then finally, let's create a text view. So we're going to go private text view. And this is going to be the player turn. So now that we have these variables set up, let's come all the way down here and we can create the setters for these. So we can type in public set the play again button, and Android Studio can fill this one in for us. We can type in public set, and we're looking for the home button this time. So this option right here. Hit enter, Android Studio again fills it out for us. And we can do the same thing for our text view. So public set player turn. And then that will create the setter for our player turn variable. Now all we have to do is come back over to our tic-tac-toe board.java file, and within our setup game method, we can actually assign the values that were passed within here to those variables in our game logic class. So to do this, all we have to do is type in game.set play again button, and all we have to do is pass in our play again button. Game.set the home button, we're going to pass in the home button. And then we have the game.set player turn, which is the player display, so that text view. And I think I forgot to create the setter for the names, so it's game.set names. So let's come back over to our game logic and create this setter as well. Oh, and I don't even think we created the string array. So let's create the string array first. So private string array, and then we're just going to call it player names. And then I'm just going to give it a default value of player 1 and player 2. Now, the reason I'm going to do this is because if someone doesn't enter in anything, like me when I just kind of skip over that page, these values will be assigned by default. Now that I have this, we can come and create the setter at the very bottom. So public set player names, and then Android Studio create this final setter for us. And then we can come back over to our tic-tac-toe board.java file, and then we can call the set names method that we just created. So set player names, and then we just have to pass in the names. Okay, so now we have our setup method created, and then this is going to assign all of the values that the game logic is going to need to actually set various views, either as visible or non-visible, and update the text with whoever's turn it happens to be. All right, so I think I went through that really fast, so let's just do a broad overview of what's happening in our setup game method and why we're using this. So the setup game method is being used because our game logic class needs access to these views right here, our play again button, the home button, and this text view right up here. There's no text in it, so you can't really see anything, but there's a text view there, and it's going to display whoever's turn it happens to be. Now, the game logic needs access to these views to actually change the attributes of them. If you remember, when we run this app, our play again button and the home button were not visible when the users first started the game, but they became visible once a user won. And our text view alternates between whoever's turn it happens to be. So it'll be like player 1's turn, and then when they place in a marker, it says player 2's turn. We couldn't do something like that unless our game logic class had the instance of those views. So that's all this game board is doing, is assigning these variables here, which is going to store those instances of the two buttons and the text view. It's just passing those along into our game logic class. Now, if that didn't make sense, leave a comment down below and I can explain it a little bit differently for you. Now, one thing that I think would be cool is to actually update our text view as to whose turn it happens to be. So then we can come back over to our game logic activity, and we're looking for our update game board method. And we need to place some code within this first if statement here. So just to recap what's happening in this if statement, once the user clicks a cell on our tic-tac-toe board, it's going to check to make sure that the box is actually empty. So this line here is just saying, hey, if the spot that the user just clicked happens to be 0, so it's empty, we need to assign that spot to the player's value, either a 1 or a 2 representing the X and O. Then what we need to do after this is update the text view that displays whose turn it is. So we can do this by typing in if the player equals 1, so it's player 1, then we need to call the player turn, so that's our text view, dot set text, and set our text to the player names, so that string array that holds both the players' names, the second spot, because we're switching the player's turn, plus apostrophe S turn. Oh, and I need to put this within this parenthesis here. So this is going to change our text from player 1's turn to player 2's turn. Now, this is another reason why we needed these default values, because if the user doesn't place in any values, these strings will be empty and it'll kind of look a little weird. So it'll just be like apostrophe S turn. So place in those default values for the string array. But if that's not the case, we can type in else, copy this line, paste it in our else statement here, but change this 1 to a 0. Now this is looking good, but don't forget we have to call our setup game method here, because if we don't call that, our program isn't going to know what player turn is. We haven't defined a value for it, so we have to call that setup game method. We're going to do that in our game display activity, but if you notice, we don't have any of the other views, so our play again button, our home button, and our text view brought into our Java code. So let's go ahead and do that. We can come back into our game display activity, and we're going to do the same thing that we did with our tic-tac-toe board. So we're going to type in button, call it play again, button, and we're going to set that equal to a find view by ID, r.id, and I don't remember what the ID for this was, so let's come back over to our XML file, click our game button, and if we go over to the far right, it has an ID of button 3, which I don't like. I'm just going to call it play again. Hit hit enter, refactor that, and I'm gonna check what is our home button. Call this home button. And I'm pretty sure we didn't give an ID to our text view either. We didn't. Okay, so let's call it player display. Refactor that one as well. Okay, so now we have our play again button with an ID of play again. We have our home button with an ID of home button. And then we have our text view with an ID of player display. So let's come back over to our game display.java file, and then we could type in .play again, which is going to grab our play again button and store it into this variable here. I'm going to copy and paste this line below it and then change it from play again button to home button, and then change the ID to home button. And then all we have to do is grab that text view as well. So text view, player turn, set that equal to a find view by ID, r.id dot player display. So this is going to grab our text view and store it into this variable here. Now, one more thing we need to do is grab the player's names that was entered in on our player setup activity. Now, if you remember, we created an intent that actually passed these player names along. So let's go ahead and actually grab those now in our game display activity. So to do this, let's come just below here, and we could say the string array, we're going to call it player names, and then set that equal to a get intent dot get string array extra, so this first option right here. And then all we have to do is pass in that ID that we gave it. If we come back over to our player setup.java, we can copy and paste this ID right into there to avoid a typo. So this should grab that string array that was passed over to our game display activity and store it within this variable here. Then what we can do is come past our tic-tac-toe board. So once we grab that and store it into our tic-tac-toe board variable, all we have to do is type in tic-tac-toe board.setupGame and then just pass in our buttons, our text view, and the player names. All right, so now that we called our setup game method, let's actually come up to the far right, click the play button to run our emulator again. And now if we click the play button, I'm actually gonna fill in some names here. So I'll go Jason, and I'll type in Bobby, because I think that was the name we used at the beginning of the series. Click submit names, and you'll notice there's no name displayed as to whose turn it is. Now, if we do click a spot, it'll let us know, hey, it's Bobby's turn now, which would be O, and then it alternates between the turns. Now, why is this? It kind of seems weird that this is happening, but if you remember, we actually defined our text view to be empty when this activity is created. So if we come back over to our game display.java file, after we get the player names, we could come down here, type in if the player names does not equal null, so there's actually something in there. What we can do is type in the player turn dot set text to the player names, the very first person, plus the apostrophe s comma turn. So this will give it an initial value of whatever name is in our player names array. So let's come back over to the far right, click the play button again, and then if we click play, fill in these names again, submit the names, and then once our activity is first loaded up, you can see now we have Jason's turn displayed. And if we start clicking around, it'll alternate between whoever's turn it is. All right, so now that we have that working, what I'd like to do is make it so our play again button and the home button aren't visible when the activity first loads up. So let's close out of the emulator and we can add in that code really quick. It's super easy. In our game display activity, all we have to do is type in play again button dot set visibility to view dot gone. So this is going to make it invisible to the user. We can copy and paste this code here, paste it just below it, and then I'm going to change it from play again button to home button. So when the activity is first loaded up, those buttons aren't going to be visible to us anymore. And then once we have a winner, those buttons will then become visible again. So let's come back up to our play button to run our emulator, and let's see if this actually works. So once this loads up, I'm going to click play. I'm not going to fill out any of these fields. And then you'll see that our buttons are gone once our activity is first loaded up. All right, now that we have that all done, we're really close to being done with this app. All we have to do now is come over to our GameLogic class and actually write a method to figure out whether or not we have a winner. So let's come back over to our GameLogic.java file, and just below our update game board, I want to create a new method called winner check. So we're going to type in public boolean winner check. And then this isn't going to take in anything. And what this method is going to do is kind of act like our update game board check. It's going to return either true or false to let our tic-tac-toe board know if there was a winner. Now it's going to return true if there was a winner and false if there wasn't. So then it can use those two Boolean values to prevent the user from further clicking on the tic-tac-toe board, placing in extra markers even if there was a winner. So let's come into our winner check and we can write some code to actually determine whether or not we have a winner. So the first check that I'd like to perform is a horizontal check. So to do this, all we need to do is type in for int r equals 0, while r is less than 3, and then we're just going to do an r++. And then within here, we're just going to have an if statement stating that if the game board, whatever r position our for loop is on, and then we're going to hard code in a 0 to fix our columns, if that equals the game board, whatever row we're on, and then the column associated with that, and I'm going to copy and paste this line over here, but we're going to fix this first spot here and change this from a 1 to a 2. So this is going to check the rows of our tic-tac-toe board, and if these three values are equal to one another, we know we have a winner. Now, there's one thing you have to remember is that we filled our game board with a bunch of zeros. So if we run this right now, we're going to instantly have a winner, because once our game board is checked, it's going to find 3 zeros in a row, and it's going to think that we have a winner. But in reality, we don't. So we want to throw in another and type in game board, the row and this column. So as long as that does not equal 0, then we're going to run some code in here to let our method know that we have a winner. To let our method know that we have a winner, let's come up here and define a Boolean variable. So we can type in Boolean is winner, and we're going to set that initially to false. So if we do have a winner, so our if statement comes back as true, then we need to update our is winner to true. Now, the rest of our checks are going to follow the same format. So I'm going to go ahead, write those really quick, and then I'll come back and explain each line. So I'll be back. All right, so I finally got these all filled out. Let's go ahead and actually explain what's happening in this code. So for the first one, our rows, we're going to iterate through our rows with this for loop, and then we're going to fix our columns, which is going to allow us to scan through each row and check whether or not those three spots are equal to one another. And then if that is the case, our is winner is going to be equal to true. And we're doing our same thing for our columns, except this time we're going to fix our row variables and iterate over the columns. And then we have to do our diagonal checks. So this is the negative diagonal check. It's going to make sure that the top left corner is equal to the middle one, and that the top left corner is equal to the bottom right corner. Also, it has to make sure that one of these values isn't equal to 0. And then if that's the case, so if these come back as equal to one another, we set is winner to true. And this is doing the same exact thing as this above one, except it's getting the positive sloping diagonal. So now that we have all of our winning checks written out, what we need to do is actually write some code to let the user know that there's actually a winner. So we need to update our text view and set our two buttons back to visible. So how can we do this? All we have to do is use an if statement and say if there is a winner. Then we can set our play again button dot set visibility to view dot visible. So we're going to make it visible again to the user so they can actually interact with the button. And we're going to change the play again button to our home button. So make that button visible as well. And then after this, what I'd like to do is update our edit text to display who won. So all we have to do is type in player turn dot set text to the player names. So whatever player's turn it happens to be. And then we have to subtract 1 because we need that index value. So if it's player 1, we need it to be an index value of 0 for our string array. And if it's player 2 who won, we need it to be an index value of 1 to extract that name here. So we're going to extract the player's name with this line right here. And then all we have to do is tack on a plus space and then just 1 with a few exclamation points. And then after this if statement, we also need to check to see whether or not there was a tie game. So to do this, we can type in else if the board filled. Now we haven't defined this variable yet. So if that equals 9, then we're going to do the same thing here. So copy this code, paste it in here, except we're going to change this line right here to a tie game. So what is this board filled variable? Well, it's going to be an integer. So we're going to go int board filled. And then we're going to set it to an initial value of 0. And then what we can do is iterate through each spot on our tic-tac-toe board and see if it's filled or not. And then if it is filled, we're going to increment this value by 1. So we can do our nested for loops. And then within our nested for loops, all we have to do is type in if the game board followed by our row and column. So if that specific cell does not equal 0, then what we want to do is type in a board filled plus equals 1. So this line right here will increment our board filled value by 1 each time it finds a non-zero value. Then once this for loop runs, it's going to check to see if there was a winner. So it's going to see if any of these winning checks came back as true, and if that is the case, it's just going to pop into this if statement and run this code here. But if that wasn't the case, it's going to hop into this if statement if our board filled value equals 9. But if that's not the case, we need to return false. And I forgot we need to return true in these cases here. So we could go return true, come in here and return true. Okay, we're looking really good so far, but the question now is, how do we implement this method to let our tic-tac-toe board know that we have a winner? So to do this, the way I came up with was defining a new Boolean variable within our tic-tac-toe board.java file. So let's come all the way up to the top and let's define this new Boolean variable. I'm just going to define it right below here. I'm going to type in private Boolean, and then I'm going to call it winning line. And then I'm going to set it equal to false. Now, the reason why I'm calling it winning line is because if there's a winning line, that means that we have a winner. So we can use this variable to our advantage by wrapping this block of code here in an if statement that checks whether or not to see if we have a winning line. So we could type in if there isn't a winning line, so someone hasn't won yet, then what we need to do is run this block of code here. Now, if you remember, this block of code is what actually allows the user to place in values into our tic-tac-toe board, right? So if there isn't a winning line, so there isn't a winner, then if the user's spot is valid, then we need to update our game board and then update the graphical portion of our game board. But after they place in that marker, what we need to do is make sure that they didn't win by placing in that marker. So to do this, we could type in if the game.winnerCheck. Now remember, this returns a Boolean value. So if there was a winner, it's going to come back as true and run the code in this if statement. And then all we have to do is set our winning line equal to true. And then we're just going to update our tic-tac-toe board by typing in invalidate. Now, the beauty behind the winning line is that even after there's a winner, if the user presses our tic-tac-toe board on an empty cell that's still currently there, this winning line will now be true, and it will prevent the user from actually placing in another marker even after there was a winner because of this if statement right here. Okay, so that should be everything we need to determine whether or not we have a winner on our tic-tac-toe board. So let's come up to the far right again and let's click that play button to run our app on the emulator. And then once this loads up, we're going to click the play button. I'm going to type in a few names, so Jason and Bobby. And then if we click the submit names button, we have Jason's turn displayed in our text view. I can start placing in some markers and our names alternate. So I'm just going to make X win, and then it says Jason won, and then our two buttons pop up again. Now, if we click the play again button, you'll notice that our buttons are still there and it still says Jason won. And if I come in here, I can't add in any more markers. So why is this? That's because we never updated our reset game methods. So let's go ahead and do those. I'm going to close our emulator and then navigate over to our gamelogic.java file. I believe we defined that towards the bottom. So in our reset game, we just need to reset all of our variables. So we need to set our player back to 1. We need to hide our buttons again. So we could type in play again button dot set visibility, and then it's just view dot gone. And then we can do the same thing for our home button. So I'm going to copy this line, paste it below it, change it from play again button to our home button. That's going to make them invisible again. Then we need to reset our text view. We can do this by typing in player turn dot set text. And then it's just going to be the player names, the first player, and then we're going to add on that apostrophe S plus turn. So this should reset all of the variables in our game logic class, but remember, we have that winning line variable that we defined. This was the reason why we couldn't continue to place in values after we clicked the play again button. This winning line variable was preventing us from adding in more markers. So if we come back down, we can look for our reset game, and all we have to do is type in winning line equals false. So let's come back up to the far right, click the play button to run our app on the emulator again. Let's test this code that we just added in. So play, I'm going to type in Jason and Bobby, and then I'll submit these names, and then we'll keep playing until we have a winner. So let's make Bobby win this time. So Bobby won. And then if we click the play again button, you can see our buttons disappeared and it says Jason's turn, and we're able to place in more markers onto our tic-tac-toe board until we have another winner. Okay, so I think I'm going to end the video here. I know I said this was going to be the last one, but there is no chance. We still have to add in these diagonal lines that are drawn. So for example, Jason won here. a diagonal line should be drawn right here, that positive sloping diagonal. Now, drawing in this diagonal line is a little confusing, and I'd like to go over it thoroughly so everyone can understand what's going on, and I think it'd be best to do that in a separate video. So there should be one more video in this series, and that should be it. As always, if you guys have any questions or you need me to clarify something, let me know down in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.